I cannot conceive myself as nothing but a bit of the world, a mere object of biological or psychological or sociological investigation. I cannot shut myself up within the realm of science. All my knowledge of the world, even my scientific knowledge, is gained from my own particular point of view, or from some experience of the world without which the symbols of science would be meaningless. I'm head of the curve, also known as James Bergman, and in this video today I will be reviewing and discussing Maurice Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception, first published in 1945. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was a French philosopher and phenomenologist, and for those who are unaware of what phenomenology is, it is basically a matter of describing, not of explaining or analysing. It is really going back to first principles and saying what is true and what can we trust in our human capacities to believe anything or to follow any claim of knowledge. Like, what is true? What can we trust? Can we trust our mind in coming to conclusions about reality? And so this is basically what this book is about. It's, of course, talking about other things such as the mind's relationship to the body, and there are some implications about artificial intelligence, virtual realities, but basically this is a piece that is questioning our first principles and how we come to conclusions using knowledge and falsifying knowledge and criticizing our understanding of the world completely. And so this is a very, very dense piece. But I loved it. Okay, yeah, a bit of a spoiler. I really, really love this book. There were parts of it that I'm going to go into that I didn't enjoy so much. But yeah, I've already just concluded the video, I guess. But yeah, I basically love this piece. It is so interesting. So yeah, let's get into it. So the book is about 500 pages, which isn't actually that bad compared to other books like The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist, which, as you guys know, if you watch my review, I really, really love that piece. So it's kind of similar to that insofar as the length of The Master and His Emissary is far longer, but the content really reminded me of it because of how incredibly dense and detailed and yeah, how serious, I guess, Maurice Merleau-Ponty is about this subject, about phenomenology. For those who follow me on Goodreads, you may have noticed I was on this book for like 3 months. I started in like early January and I only just finished it, and it's like 3 months later. This took me ages. And it isn't because it's bad or anything like that. It's only because of how difficult it is to approach as a book. Because, of course, you know me, I read difficult books a lot. But this is a primary example where I just needed to take breaks in between, because not only because of how sometimes devastating the conclusions are about reality, how we can't really necessarily trust anything or trust knowledge, which isn't necessarily what he says, but it's kind of implying that. And so not only the conclusions or the observations were definitely stagnating my reading ethic of the piece, but also just of how incredibly dense and how much focus needs to go into reading it. So yeah, I mean, I did read other books in between, but this did take me ages, and I'm sure it will take you a bit more time than the average piece. My favourite parts of the book were probably the introduction, the preface, and some of the beginning. And this is because this is when Maurice Merleau-Ponty is talking about phenomenology in itself, and he's kind of like going through the people who've criticised it in some regard, and criticising their criticism, and going through the doubts in phenomenology and why phenomenology should be taken seriously, why we should go back to our first principles, why we shouldn't assume things about reality, and the inconsistencies of the scientific method. And this I just found the most interesting. I loved his criticism of science in some way, and how we just can't assume anything. And if we are, we're just jumping hurdles and we're never going to get to the truth if we don't question the capacities and the methods that we use to get to those scientific conclusions in the first place. And so all of this was just such a highlight for me. I was just like, oh god, yeah. Okay, so yeah, question everything, but also more than that. The question, quite literally, the statement that I'm making myself and why I'm even making that statement in itself. It's just, as you can see, it just gets, well, it got me very flustered and questioning everything. This is probably the most consistent philosophical source, one of them that I've read anyway, that really, in a non-nihilistic way, non-nihilistic way, get you to just question everything. Because, you know, you get books like Saran's History of Decay and all of these, Conspiracy Against the Human Race. You get these books and they give you like a existential crisis, but this is just like philosophy. This is just straight up like hard philosophy, and it just achieves that kind of feeling without even trying to, if you get what I mean. It's devastating, but also devastatingly fascinating and interesting in every way. Admittedly, the sections on the body I didn't find too interesting when it was talking about like phantom pains and things like that. Like, I am interested in how the body is connected to the mind, but I'm more interested predominantly in the mind itself and not its relationship with the body, but actually with reality. So, and that was what was found in the first kind of preface and the introduction, and later on. But yeah, the body section, which is fairly big actually, I wasn't really that interested in, but there were some highlights. I did find all of his case studies to be interesting, but that wasn't really why I was reading the book. I was reading it, well, yeah, for the existential crisis. I was reading it for the philosophy side and obviously psychology, but not so much the diagnosis, because this was written in 1945, so that there are some things that I was like, okay, well, I'm not really surprised at that conclusion. Okay, like that in that sense, the part on the body and how it's related to the mind, there were some things there which I guess are dated, but the rest isn't, as I said, because it's to do with more unfalsifiable things such as the mind and reality and so on. So I guess if there is any drawback, it is how enigmatic it is, but also how dated it can seem at some points. I want to dive into 3 passages that still have me scratching my head and thinking about. And I'm going to try and describe them the best way that I can. But yeah, let's dive into 3 passages that I enjoyed. Perception is not a science of the world. It is not even an act, a deliberate taking up of a position. It is the background from which all acts stand out, and is presupposed by them. The world is not an object such as that I have in my possession the law of its making. It is the natural setting of and field for all my thoughts and my explicit perceptions. Truth does not inhabit only the inner man, or more accurately, there is no inner man. Man is the world, and only in the world does he know himself. When I return to myself from an excursion into the realm of dogmatic common sense or of science, I find not a source of intrinsic truth, but a subject destined to the world. The whole life of consciousness is characterized by the tendency to posit objects, since it is consciousness, that is to say self-knowledge, only insofar as it takes hold of itself and draws itself together in an identifiable object. And yet, the absolute positing of a single object is the death of consciousness, since it congeals the whole of existence as a crystal placed in a solution suddenly crystallizes it. To ask oneself whether the world is real is to fail to understand what one is asking. Since the world is not a sum of things which might always be called into question, but the inexhaustible reservoir from which things are drawn. If hallucinations are to be possible, it is necessary that consciousness should at some moment cease to know what it is doing. Otherwise it would be conscious of constituting an illusion, and would not stand by it, so there would be no longer any illusion at all. The illusory thing and the true thing do not have the same structure. For the person to assent to the illusion, he must forget or repress the true world, and cease to refer back to it, and revert to the primitive confusion of the true and the false. Yet we do not cut consciousness off from itself, which would preclude all progress of knowledge beyond primary opinion, and especially the philosophic examination of primary opinion as the basis of all knowledge. I know myself only in my inheritance in time and in the world, that is, I know myself only in ambiguity. The last line in particular basically sums up the truly existential crisis that this book compels upon you at times, or on me at least, which is, once again, I know myself only in my inheritance in time and in the world, that is, I know myself only in ambiguity. This is, to me, the perfect description of the implications of studying phenomenology, which is understanding that our predispositions are dubious. The truth is that we really only do know ourselves through ambiguity. The world is one big mystery. Consciousness is one big mystery. And what we understand about it is really, well, we would like to assert through science that we have come to a clear understanding. I mean, we like to pretend that we have, but really we don't in the bigger picture. I mean, we understand somewhat how things came to be. We understand some of what is, such as objects in the universe, space and time, the body. We understand biology to some extent, but what we're missing is the why. And this book really illustrates that fact, that, look, whilst we can say and we can dance around science and say how much it helps us, which, look, fair enough, but it has its drawbacks, right? And we shouldn't be so arrogant to assume that we've understood everything, or that certainty is necessarily attainable, because science is predicated on predictions, and so it's not certainty whatsoever, but probability. And I think, and I would agree with some theists who say, look, scientism, that's a big issue, and I do agree. Anybody who believes that science can explain everything, and that's a metaphysical claim. I mean, to say that science can explain everything, by what standard can you even claim that? I mean, science can explain the natural world, biology, as I said, but there's no evidence to suggest that everything, our capacities, for example, can be justified. Our epistemology can be justified. I mean, science has no explanation for that apart from observations of the natural world and obviously evolution and things like that, which we can all agree that isn't false. Although I have heard some criticisms of it, but that doesn't tear down the bigger picture. So yeah, I mean, this book basically gave me many mini existential crises and really reminded me, like Ian McGilchrist's piece, that reality is more mysterious than we let it out to be in the modern world. I should probably drink my drink now. But yeah, the piece is centered, of course, on the material, the body, the mind, but predominantly what I enjoyed most about it was certainly the fact that it doesn't take anything for granted. And I think these days, scientists who are advocates of scientism, believing that science can explain everything and that's all we need, I just don't think that's a good approach. I think we should always be honest about our ambiguity, as Merleau-Ponty says. In that sense, it's just very refreshing to read a piece in 1945 saying what is still relevant today about the universe and how life, reality itself, is shrouded in mystery, and to deny that is to deny reality itself. Overall, this book is great, as you can probably tell already from from me speaking about it. I really enjoyed this. Yes, it has some parts that I wasn't really fond of. Yes, it is extremely dense, and it's riddled with things that are ambiguous, like reality itself. That's about it from me. Thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts on the piece, or if you have any questions about it, if you want to check it out, then let me know in the comments section. Yeah, I mean, even reviewing this piece, like, I wrote a kind of script this time, and I don't really do that very often. Not like a word-for-word script, but kind of, you know, more condensed notes than usual. And I realized by the end of filming this that my notes were a lot more clear than what I probably said in the video, and I guess that's the whole thing with this book. It's really difficult to put into words what Merleau-Ponty is trying to say, and let alone explaining them. And so I would say, yeah, apologies if I couldn't explain his ideas well, but yeah, please do check out this piece. It is really, really interesting. Yeah, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.